Hello and welcome to the Stars of the Tribe podcast. I am your host, Jordan Bear Jew Berman, and I am stoked to have our guest on today, basketball great Danny Schayes. Now, let me tell you about Danny Schayes. Danny graduated from Syracuse University, where he was starting center on the men's basketball team, and named to the 1981 All-Big East first team. He was both an All-American and an academic All-American. So he's a smart dude, and you'll find that out. Danny was then selected in the first round of the 1981 NBA draft as the 13th overall pick by the Utah Jazz. He played 18 seasons in the league, which is unbelievable. From 1981 to 1999, the man has staying power, including stints with the Jazz, Nuggets, Bucks, Lakers, Suns, Heat, and Magic. Danny stands at 6'11". He's got to be the largest Jew I've ever met, and I'm a pretty big Jew. I'm 6'1", 210, all right, 215, and he totally towers above me. Danny is also the son of NBA legend Dolph Schayes, a 12-time NBA All-Star, 1955 world champion with the Syracuse Nationals, also known as the precursor of the Philadelphia 76ers, and he's a member of the Naismith Hall of Fame. Dolph is just a legend. Welcome to the Stars of the Tribe podcast, Danny Schayes.
Why, thank you, and thank you for doing the wave, Jordan. That was great. Really enjoyed it, and very excited to spend my morning with you.
So, Danny, I gotta, before we dive into your childhood and your from high school to college to the pros, I gotta ask you, what is it like posting up against Shaq?
Well, as you know, Shaq in his prime was what we used to call in the old days a load. And so tough to deal with in the low post. Fortunately, at that part of my career, I was a pick and pop guy. And the one thing, if you know Shaq's game, he hates defending the pick and roll away from the basket. So I used to torment him with the pick and pop game. I had Penny Hardaway as my point guard, who was great going to the rim. I popped to that wing and corner, and I just be shooting, dropping 18-footers on him the whole game. So we had I love playing against Shaq. Great dude, fun to be around, and just one of the all-time great guys.
And you were like a svelte 235?
Well, they didn't really adjust that much since college. So yes, when I came into the league, I was a very supermodel like 235, but we did improve that over the years.
Well, when I first met you, I just assumed you were just a male model that happened to focus on the larger category of clothing.
Exactly. I was the big and tall model at that point. But actually, Jordan, I know I was getting a little porky. It used to be people say, wow, you play basketball? And then when they started coming up to me and say, oh, did you play football? I went, oh, dude, I got to go on a diet. If they think I'm a lineman, that's a tough line to cross there.
So Danny, I've got to ask, you're an upstate New York guy, right? You grew up in DeWitt, New York?
Yes, I did. Born and raised in the Syracuse area. Went to college there. We used to joke with the snow, got paroled after college, and came out west. And, it was really funny. So growing up there, you didn't know any better. Winter was winter, and you just dealt with the winter, and we didn't need a sunny day to be happy. Then my freshman year in college, we actually played a game in Anaheim against Athletes in Action. Went out to L.A. in December, and it was 50 and misty rain. And I just remember going, what a beautiful day. Meanwhile, people in LA wouldn't go outside. It was such a miserable day. We had Disneyland to ourselves, and I just remember, oh my God, it's December, and I can see the road. I'd never seen that before. Then when I got in the NBA, the Clippers were still in San Diego. Try going to San Diego in January on a road game. First time I ever played a game with a sunburn, and I kind of sucked it up. But I did have a great day at the beach before the game.
All right, so I've got to ask you. Here you are. You're a kid growing up in the middle of upstate New York. And by the way, I went to school up at Cornell in Ithaca, New York. So I have a taste of the character building weather of Central New York. But here you are. You're growing up the son of a NBA legend. Those are some big Converse sneakers to fill. Assuming, I don't know, did he wear Converse? What'd your dad wear when he was playing?
Yeah, he did. He had the Chuck Taylors, the high Chuck Taylors back in the day. He used to joke, he got one pair for the season, so they were all like yellow, sweaty by the end of 20 or 30 games. What was interesting, though, is for me, it was all benefit, very little downside. I had an older brother who took all the incoming. about being Dolph's son. I kind of snuck in behind. There was not an NBA team at the time, so it was, we were well known in town, but we didn't have all that, constant NBA kind of pressure. And I had great benefits. We went to the Hall of Fame when he was inducted, went every year. I was named after the inventor of the 24-second clock, Danny Bizone. We can talk about that a little later. And Danny was still around at the time, still living, and so we got to spend time with him. They have a preseason game in town every year, or maybe Buffalo, that we'd go to. So it was just enough. The biggest advantage I really got was that my dad started the second basketball camp in America. Believe it or not, it didn't always exist. 1950 started. He and Bob Cousy started really invented the industry. So growing up, I used to improve a year in a week going to basketball camp. Being Dolph's kid, I got all the best coaching. He always bring in a pro to do a lecture, Dave Bing or JoJo White, or somebody on that level, Jumping Johnny Green. Raleigh Massimino would come up every year and lecture. I mean, it was just a fantastic time. And really, your game would improve a year in that week. Total immersion, not morning till night. And that was really kind of the biggest differentiator, because even on a pro level, my fundamentals were exceptional, and I really owe it all to his basketball camp.
Because it's interesting when we look at the sons and daughters of legendary athletes. I think sometimes there's a push and pull. There's one sense of like, hey, I've got to work just as hard, or I'm going to kind of do what they do. And then there's another approach of I'm going to do something completely different so that I'm not even compared to them. Was it just the pure love of the game? Was it being around it? Did you feel like you had something to prove? What drove you, especially in your younger years?
Well, there was a lot of all of that. For me, growing up, it was just something fun to do. I was always the tallest kid. I mean, I was taller than my teacher in third grade. And so, being a basketball kid was natural on every level. Of course, my dad was my dad. My brother played, recreation growing up with the JCC, at the YMCA when we lived in Buffalo. My dad was the coach of the Buffalo Braves, the team that's now the Clippers. When I was in 6th and 7th grade, was a ball boy, so I was around the game all the time. Got exposure to the game on a super high level. So got those great experiences. And for me, it was just a very natural thing. There wasn't a discussion about it. I just played basketball. Also played lacrosse in high school. Went to sleepaway camp. My dad also owned a 8-week summer camp, a sleepaway camp in the Lake George area. So it was all sports all day long, everything: softball, tennis, in the lake, swimming, sailing. So sports were just a everyday thing.
Interesting. And one thing I wanted to share is I actually met you at a 76ers ceremony where they were unveiling the Dolph Schayes Legends Walk statue. And I see the entire family. I mean, the entire Schayes clan is fairly large. But talk to me a little bit about that, because I got to tell you, there are a lot of folks who, the names, Hank Greenberg, Sandy Koufax, when people talk about, great Jewish athletes, maybe Sid Luckman. But Dolph Schayes is not only the greatest Jewish basketball player ever, he was recognized as one of the top 75 NBA players of all time. So talk to me about like his legacy and that event with the statue unveiling.
Right. Well, again, in my growing up years, he retired when I was 4, so I didn't really have memories of him playing. But like I said, he was an NBA coach of the Buffalo team, the Buffalo Braves, when I was in 6th and 7th grade. So, very involved in that in a day-to-day, manner. Being a said ball boy, going to practices. He take us on one road trip a year, my brother and I. And so it was always very a part. And then right after that, he was inducted in the Hall of Fame. Senior in high school, he actually was the only time I played on a team he coached. When we went to the Maccabea in '77. We can talk about that a little bit also. So again, it was always part of it. And not being in an NBA city, there was a little bit of a buffer there. My dad was very well known in town, not just as a celebrity player, but just as Dolph. I mean, he was in the Chamber of Commerce. He would, go to all the local events, and his name was in the phone book. He took great pride in that. Very social and active in the Jewish community, synagogue, or other charity events, golf tournaments, etc. So very much a part of the community. Not a big city, 300,000. So. You noticed him, when he was around. He's a local businessman. So, so again, it was just a very natural part of the community.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I took my younger son Nate to visit Syracuse, and by the way, very strategic. We visited in August because he's looking at colleges right now, and of course, we had to visit the mural where Dolph and an array of basketball greats. I mean, it's funny, being close to Philadelphia, you think of Philadelphia as an amazing basketball city, but Syracuse. I mean, talk about a basketball town. Syracuse is a top-notch basketball town.
Well, obviously, having the Nats there in the 50s and 60s, when the NBA was really in its pioneer phase. Then after the merger of the BAA and the NBL, in '49 there was over time the forcing the pushing the small cities into big cities. So the Philadelphia obviously had the Warriors back then, and they actually offered the Syracuse owner the opportunity to pick either LA or San Francisco. When the league went west, he did not want to go. So Minneapolis, famously picked LA. Philadelphia picked San Francisco, and then Syracuse filled Philadelphia, became the 76ers. And that was just part of that migration to big cities, right, as the league was growing and expanding. But that pioneer era, 40s, 50s, early 60s, pre-ABA, was kind of its own thing. And really, he was in the pre-shot clock era. People always think that was around everywhere.
Yeah.
The shot clock, really maybe the greatest innovation in sports history, saved the NBA. The pre-shot clock era, gruesome as far as style of play back then, because quick history lesson. There were two rules that were competing. One was no shot clock, and also, you may remember this, there was a one-shot foul. If you fouled in the act of a non-shooting foul, you actually got one shot. So think about it. You're down 10 at half, you got a foul, right? They get one ball back. So the other team would say, well, we're not going to let you do that, so we're going to foul you back. And the teams, the games were getting into these free throw contests, in the second halves. So the 24-second clock just transformed the game completely. It was an instant, not just a hit, but a sensation. Transformed the game. Actually, the first year of the shot clock, the average scoring in the league went up 15 points a game. I mean, just really transformed how the game was played. So again, that pioneer era, very, very difficult. The first NBA All-Star game in 1951 was played in Boston, because the Boston owner was the only guy rich enough to take a bath if it bombed. They didn't even know if they were going to have an All-Star game. There was a story of the owners standing in the hallway by the turnstiles, counting people as they came in. So when they got to a certain number, they go, okay, we can break even, we're good. And then they got to enjoy the game. So it was the Wild West, the frontier back then. People always like it is today, but it was it was definitely the old days.
Well, one of the things I learned at the ceremony at the Sixers headquarters in Camden, New York, to honor your father, Sonny Hill, also known as the mayor of Philly basketball, shared a story about how your dad, during the integration of the NBA, I think Earl Lloyd, his teammate, was the first black NBA player to actually get on the court. And that Dolph was really not just a great teammate, but just really an amazing kind of mentor and colleague. So, to me, there are so many amazing ties between the black and Jewish communities. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, because that was something that Sonny really, he really inspired me about.
Sure, and you have to remember the times, right? It was the mid 50s, 54, 55. And integration was new. It was not as dramatic as Jackie Robinson in baseball. Again, this is some short number of years later, but that had already happened. So that Jackie took those slings and arrows, but still, a black athlete coming to Syracuse, in the Northeast, there was some smoothing over. My dad was very welcoming to Earl, helped him get set up in an apartment and get around town and get established locally, get welcomed by the community. Syracuse, the NBA actually has 3 first black players, and just had a little timing. Earl was the first one to actually get in the game. Chuck Cooper and Sweetwater Clifton. Also, one was the first to play, get signed a contract. One was, so there's like a few little firsts, but that was that small group that really integrated the game and changed the NBA forever. But Earl Lloyd, got to know him, his son Kevin. Just an amazing guy, a great artist and humanitarian, and really got to, like I said, get to know the man later in life. And Earl was just an awesome addition.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think it was Doc Rivers at the ceremony who said, you've got to be a great player to win the ring, but you've got to be a great person to get the statue.
Right.
And so, when I think of your dad, I just think of a mensch, just a man beyond the game who just, really brought his entire self to just elevating those around him. And of course, he was actually, am I correct? He was actually a player coach when he came down to the Sixers, right?
Exactly. So back then, as we mentioned, budgets were a little tight. So came down after the first year. They ended up making him player coach. And so he did that for a year. And then after, it was difficult. It wasn't the easiest thing to do. So after that, he decided, they said, really, you should pick one, go back to player or full-time coach. And his biggest regret is he picked full-time coach. He said, would have liked to really finish it. Even though he had a long career, played 16 years, he came into the league very young at 19. And he was the first, at one time, the NBA's all-time leading scorer, the first player to 15,000 points.
Wow.
And he was very close to being the first player to 20,000, but ended up at that where he had 19,200 and plus, and ended up kind of shortening his career right at that point. He goes, he would have been the first one to 20,000 as well. But, as you know, as a player, once you're done, you're done. You can't go back. And so that was
True.
one of his regrets that, he would have liked to have, kind of finished his career more as a player.
And of course, there's a very iconic photo of your dad coaching, and you've got Wilt Chamberlain, sitting in that chair right at courtside. I mean, that must have been a pretty amazing experience to see that intergenerational passing of the torch a little bit.
It was, I got to know Wilt a little bit later, and he and my dad had their issues both directions.
Sure.
But when you look at that team, Dolph was the first coach in sports, U.S. sports history to be coach of the year that year, and then get fired the same year. That was the year have the famous incident where Havlicek stole the ball, if you remember that scene.
Mm-hmm.
Coach of Philly at the time, and there's actually a very funny experience. We were at the Hall of Fame, and in their media area, they set up a little area where you could announce famous plays, and you sit down at a mic, and they would run the play, and you'd be the announcer. And they had that play, so
wow.
Got up and he called the play, and then at the end he goes, "That Havlicek," and started cursing him out, and we were just laughing hysterically. He said, "I finally got to curse him out over the air, for getting me fired." We were all hooting and hollering. It was hysterical.
Love it. So let me get back to Syracuse. So obviously, you're growing up in Syracuse. Was it a no-brainer that, hey, you're going Orange, you're going to Syracuse University to play, or hey, were you considering leaving the tropical confines of Central New York?
Actually, I knew Jim Boeheim growing up. He was a counselor at my dad's camp.
Oh, wow.
I team naturally growing up there. Roy Danforth, the previous coach, took the team to the Final Four when I was a sophomore in high school. They were known as Roy's Runts back then because they were a small team. It was back then the team was just starting to come into national prominence. So they were a big Cinderella that year. And speaking of weather, it was Final Four in San Diego, and nice. So night on the news during that weekend, they would cut to the San Diego weather guy because, it's Siberia season where we are. And they're like, well, it's high of 81 today. And then we're like, no, there's nowhere in America that it's 81 right now. But actually it came down to Princeton. The great Pete Carrill was the coach there. He and my dad were friends. Wake Forest was the other one. And Syracuse. I actually thought I was going to go to Wake Forest. Really loved the area. Pete was also great at Princeton. Mm-hmm. And at the end, I ended up choosing Syracuse. Believe it or not, a little bit of a dark horse. They had Roosevelt Bowie there, the All-Star center, the All-American center, who was just a year ahead. And I realized later it was really an emotional decision because I thought I had something to prove that I wasn't good enough to play there. And Roosevelt had a great career. I came in. That didn't start till my senior year. Was drafted in the middle of the first round, which Roosevelt was drafted in the second round, and up until this year, I had the longest NBA career of any player ever to come out of Syracuse. 18 years. Carmelo Anthony just passed me at 19, and we had a laugh about it at the All-Star game when the top 75. I told him I wasn't mad at him. Very happy for him. And he did get my name in the paper, so that was. Always a good thing when you're in the rearview mirror a few years. So
nice.
It worked. Like I said, I had a very strong career there, and like I said, the pro career, a real standout, even by Syracuse standards.
Well, it's funny when I was visiting Syracuse this past summer, and I went to one of the merch shops there, and I said, "Hey, we need more Schayes jerseys. Come on! I see Anthony all over the place. Where's the big dog? Come on now!" So
Well, I wore 44 there, which is the icon football number. So every
Jim
time they
Brown,
release
right?
that, I just say they got my jersey up. And I also used to joke they retired. They did retire my number at Syracuse. Unfortunately, they just spelled my name wrong. They spelled it Coleman.
Ah,
Uh, so for Derek Coleman, and then so the number actually has been retired already a couple of times in basketball. So we'll see about adding the Schayes number to make it a the third or fourth number 44 that's been retired.
hey, listen. Clearly, someone didn't use spell check. If
Exactly.
Cole, very close to SCH on the keyboard, so it's
It
certainly
happens.
understandable. Now,
It
now,
happens. You don't pay attention because
now,
also John Wall was a 44. There's a good string even on the basketball side of star 44s. But I was the big name 44.
nice, and of course, talking about big things. The dome, aka the Carrier Dome, although I think the name has changed. What was it like? I mean, my understanding is you opened the dome. Am I correct?
I
That
opened
was
the dome my senior year, so I got the joy of playing in two great home courts, Manley Fieldhouse, which was the old home court. We had a 57 game winning streak going into closing the dome, and then or closing Manley, and then opened up the Carrier Dome my senior year. We had the first Big East championship there, which we were able to win a triple overtime thriller against Villanova.
wow.
And at the time, nobody thought you'd ever fill it. I mean, come on, you had seat 30,000 for basketball. We got 11 the first game. Even the Big East championship, I think the attendance was under 17,000, 16 and
Wow.
change. And it was something we definitely grew into. The big milestone, Rupp Arena was the behemoth stadium at the time in the low 20s as far as attendance, and it was a big deal when we finally beat the Rupp Arena record for the largest on-campus basketball crowd. Because when the
Hmm.
season started, like I said, I think 11 was the first game, and then we crept our way up. But then 13, 15, 17, and then we got close, and then big push and we beat Rupp Arena for the largest crowd. And so having 25, 26,000 was unreal, back in that era, let
And
alone
and
now,
you
free and change on
and
a
you
regular.
standing at 6'11", your head just barely was able to fit within the dome.
Well, it's funny, quick dome story. If you remember, it had the parachute bubble roof,
Yes.
which I found out is not very well insulated
Mm.
and horribly expensive to heat the thing. Right? So it was like 50,000 an hour to have practice, something like ridiculous.
Wow.
So they brought in a series of industrial sized space heaters to ring the court so we could have practice because they kept it, basically just don't freeze the pipes temperature when there wasn't a game. And so we could see our breath at practice. They gave us heavy sweatsuits and these giant space heaters on the side of the court. Of course, they only worked on the side of the court. It's not like it filled up the court. So if guys wanted to get subbed out just so they could stand in front of the damn space heater because we're shivering in practice. So finally, we ended up practicing back in Manley Fieldhouse because it was just too much to keep the dome warm. And then you go there pregame, you get there early to warm up and go out and shoot. It was still 650 degrees in the gym, so you're all bundled up going out to warm up, and they counted on 20,000 people breathing to warm up the stadium. So it didn't get warm till like halftime.
Wow. So best not to manscape before a game at the dome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely prep to just like you learn in Syracuse, you don't crack open the door in the winter without your coat zipped up
Yeah.
because wind blasts you and you got to go back and re-warm up. You definitely don't run out onto the court without your sweats on and everything's zipped up, or else you're going to be shivering.
So, Danny, it sounds like you had an amazing senior year at Syracuse. You averaged nearly 14.6 points, 8.3 rebounds a game, and compiled 284 rebounds. That's a lot of rebounds. And then clearly, you must have been just pumped about heading into the NBA draft. What was that like? Your senior year, kind of shifting your sights from the college to pro game.
Well, it's funny because growing up, everybody said, "Oh, you're going to be a pro. You're going to be a pro," and I
Mm-hmm.
just looked at the next level. High school, I was looking at college, and then college. Again, not being a starter, I wasn't really focused on the NBA early. It was just I had to develop, and it wasn't like it is now with all the online attention for young players. And
Yeah.
it was rare for an underclassman to get drafted. My year, I think the first 3 picks were underclassmen. Everyone thought the world was going to end
Hmm.
because pretty much everyone played 4 years of college. Unless a Magic Johnson or those guys, but rarely, in that era, did a player come out early, let alone everybody coming out early. But going into the draft, it was actually held in New York.
Nice.
And so we went, and they just started the thing where they would bring everyone in and they would televise it and make a thing out of it. And so I was sitting actually with Kelly Tripucka, the Notre Dame star. We were both about the same spot. And Kelly, a New Jersey guy, of course, and the Nets picked right in the that same sweet spot, for like 9 to 13, and he wanted to go to the Nets in the worst way. And so he was sitting there all ready. He thought they were going to pick him. They ended up picking Albert King, the Maryland star, another New Yorker.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got picked next to Detroit, which was a doormat at the time, and he was like completely bummed out. And I actually thought that, and the Jazz were next. I had zero contact with the Jazz before the draft. Zero. The team I thought was going to pick me was Portland. That was the Jack Ramsey Portland Trailblazers team, and I was perfect for their system. High IQ guy, fundamentals, high post offensive player. And and they picked 15 or 16, I think, somewhere in there. And then literally out of the blue, they called my name with the Jazz. Like I said, a complete shocker. Went up, did the interview, and I heard the background. They did a thing where they had like at that time, I think they had fans at a local bar. It wasn't like a big draft party thing.
Yeah.
And the fans wanted, someone else.
Boy.
Booed at the draft.
Oh.
And my own draft, Hot Rod Hundley was the TV guy. So it was definitely a rough beginning as far as winning the fans over, and then Herb Williams was the player, Ohio State center, who they wanted. I found out later. And but 1981, obnoxious Jewish kid from New York goes to Salt Lake City. I mean, the jokes wrote themselves. Was definitely a fish out of water. Yom Kippur was in the middle of training camp at that time. So I sat out a game. Fans had no idea what was going on. They actually had to write an article in the paper on what Yom Kippur was, because nobody knew. And my agent Bob Wolf, Jewish guy, called ahead to the local B'nai B'rith and said, "Hey, we got him coming. Can you welcome him to town?" He goes, "Have you ever had a 7-footer in your group?" And the guy responded, he goes, "Are you kidding me? Never had a 6-footer." Not a huge Jewish community in Salt Lake City at the time, but that was my first adventure. Going to the NBA, and back then, that was a time where we used to joke that dinosaurs ruled the earth. Every team had a premier center. That was the feature position in the game at the time. When I came in the league, there were 10, 20,000 point centers. Think about that. That's 20 a game for 1,000 games. There were 10 of them.
Wow.
From you guys, Kareem Jabbar, Moses Malone, Robert Parrish, Dan Issel, and that Artis Gilmore was still playing at the time. Bob Lanier was still playing at the time. Then you had guys like Jack Sikma, Alvin Adams. And then right after that, Hakeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, Rick Smits. Then you had guys, James Edwards, Daryl Dawkins, Tree Rollins. I mean, every team was loaded with bigs. And so when I came in, it took me really going through the league an entire trip to go, no, I can play with these guys. It's, you didn't know, because again, in that era, you didn't have as much contact. There wasn't games on every night. Wasn't the opportunity to go to games, play guys in the summer. So, and the big positions were the premier positions. So it was definitely a big confidence builder. Like I said, to go through the league and say, no, I can play with these guys.
Well, and that's a question I've got. When you're 22 maybe, and suddenly you're playing against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I mean, how do you find the confidence? Do you fake it before you make it, or do you? I mean, what did you have a song you put on before you went out on the court? Like, how do you get up to that level to kind of create that confidence and make sure that people on the court know you're here to play ball?
Well, and I'm getting challenged every night, right? Because by the way, you played Kareem last night, and it's Bill Walton tonight, back to back, and then you've got a Marvin Webster in Seattle with Jack Sikma. You've got Michael Thompson in Portland, #1 pick. Joe Barry
Yeah.
Carroll, #1 pick. And those were the second tier. If you want to say the second tier guys, that's how high the first tier was. Joe Barry, a 20,000 point guy, he was like the next level down, right? So,
Wow.
yeah, it was an interesting thing. And like I said, they're going at you, right? Because every team was inside out, meaning the ball was in the post a lot. I'll tell you, and that's where my fundamentals really made the difference.
Mm.
Because I learned quickly to, rely on the little things and execute. And I was fortunate that I played with great scorers. Adrian Dantley was the star of my team with the Jazz, led the league in scoring. Daryl Griffith, Dr. Duncanstein from Louisville,
Nice.
Ricky Green, our point guard from Michigan. So we had, like I said, great scores. So offense, I could kind of work my way into, into the scoring roles. Started out as a 8 to 10 point a game guy. Didn't start right at the beginning. Frank Layden worked me into the rotation. One of my big points of pride, we were on an 18 game losing streak. The Jazz, we were kind of with a tier team at the time.
Yeah.
Right before Stockton and Malone were drafted.
Mm-hmm.
And so we lost 18 in a row. Frank then started me. Frank Layden took over, was the head coach. And I went to our guys before the game. I said, dude, we're winning tonight. I want, when you put me in the starting lineup, I want that feather of, we ended the streak. And we ended up winning 6 of our last 10.
Nice.
And that kind of built that momentum going into the next year. Mark Eaton came the next year, future All-Star, and then John Stockton and Karl Malone the years after that. I'd just been traded to Denver then, but it was definitely a great experience. Plus, you came in on a team where I could get real minutes. I wasn't a backup to a superstar player where I get spot minutes. I could play right away and get the growing pains out without costing us a playoff spot. So it was a great learning experience.
Well, it's interesting when I think of Salt Lake and then Denver. Not exactly bagel capitals of the world, but maybe that helped you reduce your carb intake. Well, I don't know.
That's true. Although, ironically, you mentioned it. I lived on, on one of the little, if you know the geography in Salt Lake, there's a ring of mountains.
Yep.
And I lived right on the one named Mount Olympus, which was on the way up to the big ski resorts. And there was a bagel nosh in the mall right next to my house. So I was definitely a regular at the local bagel nosh.
I assume one could have ordered the Danny Schayes. What would be on the Danny Schayes if one were to order a bagel? Would it be poppy? Would it be sesame? Would there be cream cheese, butter, lox? What are we talking about?
Well, some people called me a turkey back in the day, so there'd probably be some turkey out there. And I'll have to admit, I'm a big hot pastrami guy, so it'd definitely be turkey hot pastrami and a schmear. Get the schmear, on that as well.
Yeah, you gotta do it. All right, so there you are in Denver. Literally playing at that elevation. Did you actually find that, man, there's a difference here?
Well, funny you should mention that, Jordan.
Yeah.
So I actually, when I got drafted by the Jazz, which is the second highest location, they're just a little bit under like 4,200 feet.
Yeah.
And one of the things you would do as a conditioning test when you got there, they always had the timed mile. And, for guards, it was like 5 minutes 30. For bigs, 6 minutes was kind of the standard. And I, was a holdout, actually. The Jazz were the cheapest team in the league back then because they had, they're literally no money. Every week you got your paycheck, run to the bank, first 10 cleared, the next 2 you were like hoping. Like that. And I wanted to make a great impression. So my agent said, he did not want me locally in town, because it would be tough to train with everyone, starting training camp, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed in Syracuse. I trained hard. Manley Fieldhouse had a beautiful indoor track, and so I would literally train the time mile. I got down to my best being 5:07, which is super fast for an NBA player. And I said, dude, I'm going to try and break 5 minutes when I get out there and really show them how hard I've been working. So I got out there. First thing, they put me out on the track. We run the mile, did the first half just under in like 2 minutes, 29 seconds. I go, man, I'm going to make this.
Nice.
Middle of the third quarter, ran out of air. Middle of the third quarter, the third lap. And didn't anticipate that part of it. Staggered in 5:59, just broke the thing, almost passed out. And the altitude was a real thing back then.
Was it like oxygen?
Did not make the same impression that I was hoping to make as far as breaking the 5-minute mile and setting the team record.
Let's shift gears from the Jazz to the Nuggets. I mean, you had a killer year in the 87-88 season with the Nuggets. You averaged 13.9 points, 8.2 rebounds per game. And then in the playoffs, you just turned it up to 11, averaging 16.4 points and 7.2 rebounds per game. Dude, you were in fuego. Tell me about what man lit that fire under your butt.
Well, it was an amazing team back then. It was very, Denver, one of the ABA teams in the merger, very much had that old swashbuckling ABA mentality. Doug Moe is the coach, high tempo, passing game. It was a great fit for me. We had a very deep team, loaded with scores. Alex English, Hall of Fame, Dan Issel, Hall of Fame, Kiki Vandeweghe, Calvin Knapp. We made a trade Fat Lever All-Star. So it was a great team. We were challenging the Showtime Lakers for dominance in the West. And I was, a huge part of that. I was a free agent that year also. And our GM at the time, Pete Babcock, was one of the first GMs who used analytics. It was rudimentary compared to what they do now because there were no computers. But he used to track everything through the stats, had these big notebooks with all kind of files in them. And we were very close. He called me into the office one day and he laid out his thinking. And they had a measure. Back then, tough in basketball because you have some guys play, like I was playing like 28 minutes a game, comparing against guys playing 39, 40 minutes a game. So naturally, stat for stat, their points per game was higher, et cetera. So they came up with this measure called the Larry Bird score. And the idea was to come up with some kind of common measure you can compare guys on a per minute basis. In baseball, they got wins above replacement, or they've got on base percentage, things that kind of balance it out. So the Larry Bird score was essentially, they took all the good stuff he did, points, rebounds, block shots, assists, and there was a factor for high field goal percentage, low and high free throw percentage, added them all up, then subtracted the negative things, turnovers, fouls, low field goal percentage, free throw percentage, and then divided by minutes so you can compare on a per minute basis what your overall production was. So it favored guys who filled the stat sheet, not just guys who scored and that was it, or those kind of things. And when he went over with me, and it turns out that in the center spot, which was the premier position, number one, Akeem Olajuwon, who, as did it all.
Sure.
Per minute, number two, Danny Schayes. So in all the NBA centers on a per minute basis, I was the second most productive center in the league. And so that was, and that showed that my game was really being around being versatile, doing a lot of things well, not just being a featured scorer or featured rebounder.
Wow. The LBS, the Larry Bird score.
There you go.
Did that take into account handsomeness, or was that not figured in to 2.0?
That was the bonus. They had a bonus thing. There was a stud factor.
Sure.
And,
yeah. Well, that's the S. Yeah. It's the Larry Bird
exactly.
score, LBSS. So walk me through some stories in your journey going forward. So you went from the Nuggets to the Bucks. There you are in Milwaukee. What do you remember? What's a moment that you remember from the Bucks?
Well, the Nuggets went through their life cycle. Were then guys a little bit just ahead of me. The Alex Englishes, they were retiring. The team rebuilt, and so disbanded completely. I got traded to Milwaukee, and they were also a veteran team. Del Harris was the coach, star coach, and they still had a really good team at that time, but was getting near the end. Jack Sikma was there as a center spot. Brought in Moses Malone at the center spot near the end of his career. And so it was a very veteran level team, a veteran heavy team. And then they rebuilt. So I became kind of the vestigial extra guy. Got traded to the Lakers in just an end of the season salary cap deal. It wasn't a, advance the game deal. But I was, like I said, I was a veteran guy in a rebuilding team. Yep. So they traded me for, to kind of, create a space and then bring in a young guy. So I was with the Lakers just the last 25 games of the season in '94. And then who takes over? Magic Johnson gets hired as the coach.
Wow.
When I got brought over, Randy Fund, who was the guy who followed Pat Riley, got fired like 5 games after I got there. Then Bill Burtka, the longtime assistant, took over, and then they brought in Magic for the last 16 games. And Magic and I were always friendly competitors. When he was at Michigan State, he played in the Syracuse Christmas tournament, so we were the same school year, although he obviously went out early. And then we were always great rivals during the Showtime Lakers, the high tempo Denver Nuggets days. So now we were playing on the same team. It was amazing. He'd come in practice. with us. You remember still a young guy who retired when he tested positive for HIV,
Yeah.
and was still in his early 30s, right? I mean, so so he'd come to practice, and we played the old guys against the young guys. We tortured the young guys, and that time we had veterans. James Worthy was still on the team. Kurt Rambis,
Sure.
James Edwards, Buddha from the old Bad Boys Detroit team was there.
Yep.
Vlad came in. And so then we had the young guys, the Nick Van Exels, George Lynch, North Carolina, and we played the old guys against the young guys and just torture them.
Love it.
But Matt was the one guy I always wanted to play with. All I would do is I'd set a pick, pop open, and man, the ball would hit me in the face. I mean, he was always looking, delivering. It was awesome.
Love it. Love it.
From there went to Phoenix with the Suns,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the high flying Charles Barkley, Kevin Johnson, Dan Marley team. So Danny Manning and I, Wayman Tisdale, all came in that year, and we were head and shoulders above anyone in the league. It was a great, great year. Then, unfortunately, Danny Manning blew out his knee in the middle of the season, and we went from like a step above to now in the top group.
Yeah.
But the top group was pretty good. We ended up, having the best record in the West, number one seed. We lost to Houston in a 7-game series, the Akeem Olajuwon year, where they ended up winning. We lost game 5 and 7 at home at the buzzer. Excruciating year. Then the next year, I actually went down to Miami for Pat Riley's first year there.
Wow.
Transition year. Got to play for Pat. Had a fun year. It was a tough time because Pat, super serious, team was rebuilding, so it was a transition year. Then I spent my last 3 years with the Magic. Shaq had just left. That's when he went as a free agent to LA, and the joke was that they had just filled up the team store with all the Shaq merchandise. It was because it was pretty late in the summer. Yeah. And so every homeless guy in Florida had a Shaq jersey because they had to get rid of all the Shaq merchandise because they just filled the team store up. And then my first year there, Shaq was in LA, so they only played the one time, home and home. And the first year, Shaq injured his thumb, couldn't play. So big disappointment. Second year he came back, which is the first year coming back against the team. He left on kind of bad terms at the time.
Yeah.
And so it was the game of the year, the Shaq game. I was the oldest player in the league at the time, 39.
Wow.
And the day before the game, they trade the starting center, Ronnie Cycling. So I'm now the starting center on the national TV game for Shaq coming back for his revenge game against Orlando. And the whole pregame show was lamb to slaughter. They thought Shaq was going to get 100. He was going to rip the building down. They're all kind of talking smack. And he still had a pretty good game, but I played him. I played him hard. Ended up by the second half, all the announcers could talk about was the job I was doing on Shaq. I came out, scored a bunch of points in the third quarter. We took the game over, ended up winning at the buzzer. Nick Anderson had this great 3-pointer to win it. You should YouTube it. It's a great game. So, fans stormed the court. Place went crazy, and it was like one of those standout memory games in my entire career. So,
wow.
So that was great way to be near the finish.
Well done. Schayes versus Shaq. Battle of the Titans. Love it. Love it. So talk to me, when a lot of folks, talk about their professional success, a lot of times there's a coach, a mentor, a teammate that just made a big difference. And one of the things we like to do on the Stars of the Tribe podcast is make a little toast with a little bit of the good stuff, a little bit of magic. So I've got to ask you, Danny, as I not uncork it, but as I twist it off there, who would you make a toast to? Who was that mensch for you that really made a difference in your career that you'd want to toast?
Well, it was funny. There's probably 3 people who really advanced my career in a significant way, in a short period of time. Obviously my, high school and college kind of speak for themselves. There's some real signature games we can touch on also. But in the NBA, the big places I played, Denver, Orlando, and Phoenix, all had really star coaches, guys who understood me. I was in the NBA level, I was kind of a different kind of cat because I was a high fundamental guy, high IQ guy, and I was the guy who made everybody better. So you had to really get what I did. I wasn't the highlight reel guy.
Mm.
So a lot, from the fan standpoint, I was a guy who you appreciated like a fine wine.
Yes.
So Doug Moe was kind of the first guy I really learned from. He was the Denver Nuggets coach,
Mm-hmm.
and and he was all about reads, passing game, high tempo, understand the game. Even what's ironic is that we really had no plays. When I say we had no plays, we had no plays.
Hmm.
Passing game 100% of the time. And people said, "Oh, that must be really easy." It's actually harder because you have to understand and read and react and and play the game. It's easy to follow the footsteps on the floor. Oh, go down here and set a screen and then pass the ball to there. That's actually easier than playing total freelance. I learned so much about the game, learning how to read and understand and immediately know what's going on from Doug. When I was with Phoenix, Paul Westphal was the coach there. A very, I think, underrated mind, a brilliant basketball mind, great guy.
Mm-hmm.
Learned a ton from him. And then I finished in Orlando. Chuck Daly took over as the coach there with the Magic.
Okay.
Obviously, a dream team coach, bad boys with the Pistons, Hall of Famer.
Legend.
I would say those three guys were probably, of the, believe it or not, 15 head coaches I had in 18 years. Those guys really stood out as difference makers for me.
Well, obviously we're gonna have to say l'chaim to those coaches.
Exactly.
Manoshevitz, that's a good one. So one of the things I've learned about you is you've got another basketball player in the family, your son Logan, and in addition to sharing about, hey, now you're coaching in a sense and mentoring him, but there are a lot of folks out there, including Jews, who are like, wait, Jews have a history in basketball? Danny, I've learned so much from you. I'd love for you to just share a little bit about that history and how Jews really adopted the game and just made it their own, really starting in like the 20s and 30s. Give me a little bit, drop some knowledge on our audience here, if you would.
Well, I'll tell you what, is if you understand sports, you realize that sports has always been a path of upward mobility.
Yeah.
And whether it's, on the pro sports side, whether it's, boxing was big, even horse racing was big for, the jockeys would come up. And sports was always a path to upward mobility. And in the 20s and 30s, right, but after the Great War and then through World War II, Jews were coming over from Europe in major numbers. They were in the back then the ethnic ghettos in New York. You had the different ethnic sections. And my dad was a perfect example. His parents came over from Romania in 1920, right after the war. He was born in the Bronx, and basketball was his ticket out. They were working class poor. Grandpa drove a truck for laundry, and in that era, the path was, the immigrant parent would work labor, try and get their kids into college, and then that generation would grow up, with the education, get assimilated into the U.S., and then 1, 2, 3 generations, to get to middle class, then and above, and then obviously go to professional school and use education as the path. And my dad used sports and education. He was we talked about him entering the NBA young. He actually graduated high school at 16. He skipped a year, and then in the middle of his now senior year, which would have been his junior year, he actually left the team. They were city champs. He left the team and enrolled at NYU at 16, joined the team in the midseason, and then went to the Final Four. So he actually started in the Final Four still at 16 years old, youngest player ever to this day to start a Final Four game. Graduated in 3 more years. So at 19, he had an NYU degree in engineering. Was already in the draft as a college graduate at 19, and got drafted again. The 2 leagues, the BAA and the NBL, got picked by the Knicks in one draft and the Syracuse in the other. Bidding war, Syracuse won. They offered $7,500, where the Knicks were capped at $5,000 for rookies, and came up there. So basketball was Jewish before the Second War, and people really don't realize that. There was actually a great documentary made about it called The First Basket, where they trace that history up until the first basket in the NBA history. Ozzie Sheckman, a Jewish player, scored the first basket in history. My dad actually scored the first basket in All-Star history. Quick funny story, at his 80th birthday, the league sent him a highlight reel, and we're going through the different stuff and showing it, and it showed one of the old Converse reels. They used to make these movies, like Converse would make actually feature films of highlights and things. They played in the trailers before movies and other things. and it was Marty Glickman, the great announcer. Here we are at the Boston Garden for the first All-Star game. The opening tip, Koozie to Schayes, who scores? And we're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Was that the first basket in All-Star history? Play that back. And it turned out he scored
Wow.
the first. He had no idea. I said, Dad, that's the first. He goes, really? That was the first basket in All-Star history? So Jewish player, first NBA basket, first All-Star basket. I actually called the league. Jewish guy ran NBA Entertainment. They didn't know
Huh.
of the significance, or that my dad had scored the first basket. So that year, it turned out, was was 2011. So it was the 60th anniversary of that event, the 60th All-Star game.
Yep.
So in play, they did a thing where they played the highlight. Dad got to stand up, great ovation. So now fast forward, now getting into my developing years, 1977. I'm a senior in high school. My dad was involved in this organization called Maccabi USA, and it's called the words were a little different back in the day.
Yep.
And U.S. Committee Sports for Israel. And he says, "Hey, we're playing in a tournament in Israel. I want you to try out for the team." I'm like, "What?" Okay, and I was in Jewish youth groups, and we were active in the synagogue, but had never heard of the Maccabee games.
Okay.
And so we ended up. I tried out. We made the team legitimately,
Yep.
and as a center. And so I ended up going to Israel. My first trip to Israel as a high school senior to play in the Maccabee games, which I'd never heard of. And I went over there to play basketball and had this incredible Jewish experience, which is the point of the games, right? To use sports as a path, to get in touch with your Jewish identity. Toured the country, and in that era, it was one of the greatest eras in basketball in Israel. The country is relatively new, right? Only 30 years old at the time. It was still, crawling out of the dust and the sand and being built.
Sure.
And U.S. player years earlier named Tal Brody had come to play the Maccabee in '65, was a first-round pick for the then Baltimore Bullets, and was so enthralled with life in Israel, he actually never went to the NBA and made Aliyah and moved to Israel and founded essentially basketball in Israel and professional basketball. And in that year, 1977, Israel, for the first time, won the European Championship, which was a major. I can't even begin to explain what a big deal that was.
Yeah,
They were prohibited from playing the Middle East division because the Arab countries wouldn't play Israel. So they were forced to play in Europe. And the Europe were the powerhouses. The Russian Red Army had Italy and Spain, and little Israel, showed up as in a real a Hoosiers kind of way.
Yep.
And ended up there's a great documentary about that called On the Map. You should see it. It was the story was Tal Brody brought this team to this incredible David and Goliath experience, winning the European Championship. And in his interview, he talked about how now Israel is on the map, not just in basketball, but in everything. And it was a turning point in Israel history, certainly in Israel sports history. And that was in the spring. That summer, Team USA in the Maccabee is playing essentially Israel's national team in the championship of the Maccabee games. Tal had just retired, so he did not play, and there was a U.S. player, Alcy Perry, who is their center, who couldn't play because he was a foreigner. But we played the guts of that team for the championship. And one of my great games in my entire professional career, my basketball career, was that championship gold medal game. Came down to the wire. We ended up winning the game on 2 free throws with 3 seconds to go. Willie Sims, player for LSU, who actually lived his entire adult life in Israel. Black player, moved to Israel and played there. We had Stu Clytenic from South Carolina, Brian Maggott from Maryland. I mean, a great team back then. Joel Kramer, who played in the NBA with Phoenix, from San Diego State. And again, one of the great basketball experiences was that experience. So you should look at it. It's one of those just incredible stories. And went again in 1981, my senior year in college. They still were under the Olympic rules, so I couldn't play again after that until they opened up to pros in '92. The second time I went, we were the 600-pound gorilla. And so we ended up winning the championship the second time. And but for me, basketball and I experienced Israel and really got to know Judaism through sport in the Maccabee games.
That's amazing. And by the way, Tal Brody grew up not too far from where I'm lothcated. He grew up in Trenton, New Jersey. And then I think he went to Illinois, right? He played
to Illinois, and again, went over for the Maccabees in '65. Same thing. experience as a senior in college.
Yeah.
And again, one of the incredible sports stories, Jewish or not. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
so many twists and turns, just an unbelievable time and place, and to be a part of that, in the arena in Israel, sellout crowd, 12,000, and
Wow.
the big bad boy U.S. guys against their championship. I mean, it
Yeah.
was the event of the games. I mean, just an incredible, memorable experience.
That's awesome. Well, Danny, where I wanna kind of wrap our conversation is your father, your son Logan, is an up and coming college basketball player.
Yeah.
Um, what do you tell him and other young players, especially Jewish players, but really all young players that want to be their best? I mean, what advice do you give him, especially given you've had such an incredible career and the Schayes family has such an incredible legacy? And by the way, I also know that you are married to Wendy Lucero Schayes, a former Olympic diver. So the DNA in Logan's body is, just, unmatched by anybody. But what advice do you give to Logan as he sets out to make his mark in basketball and in life?
Well, the number one thing for him, and we had a lot of discussions about this, is obviously you need to love what you do. You have to do it with passion and commitment. The difference between recreation, and I'm playing in high school, or I'm playing in small college, or I'm going to commit my life to this to play at a higher level, whether it's major college, whether it's European pro, whether it's NBA pro, those aren't the same animal, right?
Mm.
Playing basketball is not the same as committing to a life in basketball. And so to do that, you have to love it, because there's too much crap you put up with, physical work, injuries, the politics, like anything. If you're going to achieve on a super high level, you have to commit to it. Plus, as you mentioned with our history, does he really know if he's doing it because he loves it or because he thinks he's supposed to?
True.
So I had those same questions. So I was in the league, as a long time. My dad played 1,059 games, 16 years, which is a big deal back in that era because guys didn't make enough money to live on. So most of them had summer jobs, or once they got married and had kids, they just couldn't afford to play anymore. So careers weren't long, didn't have training, they didn't have health care, they didn't have, all that. So it was just hard to have a long career. So it was unusual. And so the day of my 1,060th game, I called my dad up and said, "Hey, I'm playing my 1,060th game tonight." And, and it was, I got a very weird kind of response. And he goes, "Oh, you beat the old man finally, huh?" And I realized, and it was funny because after that game, obviously I was a veteran guy, I've been in the league 16, 17 years by then. But after that game, I lost the drive to play. I didn't want to play anymore. And I was, because I didn't understand, I didn't really know that beneath it all, I was playing to be better than him. And this was the measure or something, beat him at something. Because he was Dolph Schayes, the good, every time my name was ever mentioned, but the first time I was ever in the paper, Danny Schayes, son of NBA Hall of Famer Dolph Schayes, who did this and that and this and that and this record, that record, played well. So if you took out Danny Schayes played well, 2 paragraphs of my dad in between. Every story I've ever been in was about Dolph Schayes, and so here I was finally had passed him at a thing, and then the drive, like the balloon popped, right? Wow. So a week went by, and then all of a sudden the whole thing shifted again, and I realized that now that was gone, and I could now for the first time play for me. Didn't even know this was in the background, right? But now, and then all of a sudden my love for the game actually was even higher because now I was playing for me for the first time. Hard to know that, right? Like it never occurred to me that there are other things besides just me enjoying the game. So now with Logan, as you mentioned, his mom's an Olympian, his dad's an NBA player, his grandpa's an NBA superstar. Is he playing because he has to, he's supposed to, or he loves it? And hard to tell, and it really is. So right now, and he's definitely gone up and down. There's times where he had no interest. He had a very different path than I did. Growing up, COVID hit right at the wrong time. So high school shut down. Then college flipped where they stopped recruiting in high schools because the transfer portal opened and every kid got an extra year. So he couldn't even get into a program because the rosters were all clogged. So he had he didn't have the rewards and the fun and the jubilations events that I had to make it exciting. To him, it's been 90% slog and 10% fun part. And, so it's a way different experience with his generation, and not just him. I mean, all high school kids, and all the sports are running into the same, kind of clogged system. So for him, it's we have a lot of discussion. Look, are you doing this because you love it, and then that takes a level of commitment, or
Yeah.
because you think you're supposed to? I don't want you to get to the end and say, I didn't really want it. I wasted. What could I have done if I spent that commitment on other things? Right. So
Yeah.
frankly, it's a tough thing to figure out. But right
Yeah. No, I
now,
hear you.
he's really clear. He's working hard at it. I'm really proud of him, and he wants to see how far he can go. He's also an All-American baseball player, so he had at some point he kind of said, "I'm going to commit to basketball."
Yep.
And,
Yep.
he's 6'7". He's a matchup nightmare, big and physical. Beat the crap out of you in the post, but can face up and great shooter from range, great IQ.
Yeah.
So he's really a very different player than I am.
Yeah.
Even than my dad was, and so he's finding his place.
Well, hey, everybody's got their own path. And Danny, I know you've had a ton of business success after the NBA. You're the dad of an amazing son, a great husband, and just an incredible inspiration to basketball fans in general, and certainly the Jewish community specifically. So I just want to say thank you so much for spending some time with me and our audience on the Stars of the Tribe podcast. Love the stories, love your travels, and just everything you've put into charting your own path. So congratulations to you, and hey man, keep keeping on, and again, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, thank you for having me, Jordan. I love being part of your Stars of the Tribe. It's a great undertaking. Happy to support in every way. Love what you're doing, and look forward to great things ahead.
Wonderful, Mazel tov. Take care, Danny.